Right, I guess we're ready to go. It's 12:05. We are excited to have this very timely topic today. If you're like me and you're planning on submitting a project for awards this year, the early submission deadline is January 31st, which I think is next week. And I somehow never make that early submission deadline. So the regular deadline is February 17th, which is also not too far away. I would like to introduce our two speakers for our panelists today. Jesse Smith is the lighting design leader and principal at DLR Group, and he's based in Portland, and him and his team work on projects in almost every state and in a number of different countries. Jesse got his master's in architectural lighting design from Parsons School of Design and has been living and breathing lighting design for nearly the last 2 decades. And Mark Prenger is a lighting designer for Glumac here in Seattle. He has a lighting engineering degree from the University of Colorado and has been in the lighting industry for 11 years in both manufacturing and lighting design. So I am going to be moderating today and asking questions. And if anyone here has a question that they want to put to either of our panelists, either raise your virtual hand and we will call on you, or you can type it into the chat and I can ask for you. So we're going to get started with, first question I'm going to ask, because I've always wanted to know this, is when you're putting your photos together, do you need a full 10 photos, or is it better to use what really works and not go all out and do all 10 photos? I'm going to throw it to Mark and see what he has to say.
Yeah, so I can address that. In my personal preference, so just a little bit of background, I was a judge for the Puget Sound chapter of the IES Awards last year. So I did see all the submissions and provided feedback and the scoring. So for me, I don't need to see a whole 10 images. I personally like to see the most representative of both concept and installation and final product of the project, specifically addressing the challenges and the solutions. So if you only have 5 beautiful images of that project, I'd say lean on those, because one of my, negative critiques would be maybe 5 individual unique photos where you're repeating the same rooms with almost the same views.
So really trying to incorporate the whole project and not just one particular aspect of it. And yeah. Jesse, do you have some insight on photos? And there's also like a theory, use your best photo either first or last.
Yes. All right. So there's a couple of different things there. Personally, I love starting off with the best impression I can. So I like to put in the first image is the best image, generally. That's kind of my home image. I can't remember what they call it it's kind of their welcome image that everybody sees. So I like to make that the first one. And then I do also like to end though on a strong note. And so I don't like to have kind of my throwaway image, although to Mark's point, we don't really want to have any throwaway images, but maybe something that's less impactful goes in the middle, and then kind of start strong, end strong. And then for me, on kind of the first question, I do very much encourage people to use all 10 photos, but I completely agree with Mark that they better be good photos. I have seen way too many submissions where the professional photos are there and then somebody with their cell phone tries to capture something that just doesn't cut it. And if you're trying to show an installation detail or something very special and explain it, that's one thing. I can forgive some poor quality images for that, trying to tell a story. But if that's all you had and it just doesn't quite capture it in the same way, it's jarring and I think distracting. So I would encourage you not to use that type of photo.
I agree with Jesse completely. I like to see a bookend essentially with your first photo and your last photo in the submission. Granted, the best photo is up to the designer, I guess.
Yeah.
So for me, I love to see a representative photo first of what the project is. For example, let's say it's a K-12 elementary and they did full lighting. It might be nice to have a beautiful evening shot just showing like, yes, it's a school. So that gives us a precedent of where we are starting as judges, or whoever the judging panel is. And then finishing with maybe your prettiest lighting design shot would be a nice wrap up, just to keep it front of mind when you're looking through the dozens, if not more, submissions.
That is a really good point. That context, that contextual shot at the beginning that resets our mind after we're reading, 10, 20 of these different submissions. It's nice to have that context to reset your brain and say, oh, okay, I'm looking at a K through 12 project now. And now I can kind of focus in on that and go into the details. I've definitely done some submissions where they jump right into the details and I'm lost. I understand what they're trying to do with this little concept, but I don't understand the whole picture. And so I like to be led through that a little bit so I can start somewhere and then get into the details.
Great advice. So what makes a good or not so good narrative, like that first 250 words that you write up? What do you want to see in that narrative? Or not see, not read? Jesse, I'll start with you.
Okay. That's really the toughest part. I know we all wait till the end because we're waiting on photography and we want just the right photography, but that narrative is key. It's the thing that I, as a judge, am looking at, and as somebody who's putting these together, it's the hardest part. It is where we have to blend that line of tell a story so that I'm interested, I'm intrigued, I want to know more about the project. I have some overall contextual framework to start from, and then I know where to kind of be led from there into the details. But I like that first bit to be the overarching design principles, the story that's going to get me excited about this project. But I'm also, and I know we're going to get into this too, I'm also looking for some of the key words that are talked about in the scorecards. So I'm looking for that tell us the challenge, like Mark said, what's the challenge? What were the things that came up on that project that made it unique? What were the things that made you passionate about it? And some of it may have nothing to do with lighting. And I think that's really hard for some of us to pull back and talk about maybe a little bit about the architecture or a little bit about the process of the project to get it constructed. That all of that I find very, very valuable.
Mark, do you have some words of wisdom on writing a narrative?
I did start in the engineering field, so I would also suggest writing a narrative very systematically as the scoring guide is laid out. Problem statement, concept, solution, execution. As long as you're hitting all of those points, I think that's going to lead the judges to look out for certain things throughout the rest of the submission. You need to tell us what to look for and how you achieved it. That going along with a story and invoking some emotion, but just being a judge last year, you are given these things to look out for, and it's not necessarily directly aligning with a beautifully written narrative, I guess. Granted, those submissions are much more exciting to go through if they are addressing all of the criteria in that judging guide. And I just have one note: you do not have to hit the 300 word count. If you can get all your ideas out in 200, 250 words, that's perfectly fine as a judge, from my opinion.
Yeah, and it's just to underline, it is hard. It should be hard. That means you're taking it seriously. And I can tell when I am judging the people who just kind of dashed it off, didn't put a lot of thought into it, and then I can tell those that really thought about it and crafted their statements carefully, and that goes a long way when you're reading a lot of these.
Completely agree.
Well, I have found from experience that you write the beautiful narrative, and then to get into your word count, you start like taking out does and like your grammar.
Yep.
It goes out. You throw some of that out so you can get all that detail.
Where can I put a hyphen to make this 2 words one?
Exactly.
And always have your spelling and grammar checked. The most beautifully written narratives, if I see grammar misuse or something off, it's just that a little attention to detail that can set the tone for the rest of the submission.
Absolutely.
So this leads right into what Mark was insinuating is, do you use the scorecard while you're writing that narrative as well as your captions? And
I guess we could open that up to the
answer to that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
I guess we can open that up to the group on the call. Like, are we all using the scorecard? And this is a great comment from Jesse. I don't want to take his suggestion.
I got one hand raised to show. I know, but I always write out my beautiful narrative. Jill has a hand raised, and then you're like, oh, right, I better fit the scorecard and make sure I'm hitting all of those items.
It's one of my big pet peeves as a judge. And I know you're going to get into those, but I'm gonna preemptively do it a little bit, because I have seen some absolutely beautiful submissions from around the country, and I want to score them high. But if they don't include all the information that's in the scorecard, I, as a judge, can't. Even in the, just talking about interior pretty lighting, there's still a component to the engineering that's in there. There's the environmental and energy standpoint. There's controls narrative. All of those little things, even if it's short, need to be in there. Otherwise, I can't give you any points for controls. For example, if you don't mention anything about controls ever, I can't even give you 1 point. As a judge, I've got to give you 0 because you didn't put it in. And so that's probably the area I see the least, the least forgiving. We have a discretionary bonus that we can kind of put at the end. That's only 5 points. But some of these other categories, if you don't hit it, you're missing out on 15, 20, 10 points. That's going to take you from somebody who can be a contender nationally down to, not really getting on in the submission process.
Yeah, it's a little heartbreaking when those things are left out, because that it was designed with the intent, for example, to hit 20% better than energy code. It might cut down on your allowable words in a description, but you need to hit those if you want the points.
Yeah, so like Mark said, I really advise pull that up first, especially if you have a hard time writing these narratives, which I think most of us do at some level. Pull that up, use that as your outline, and try to hit everything on there while trying to create an engaging and interesting story to pull us all in. That's why I say it's hard.
So do you have advice? So I know we talked about the photos and, starting with a good image that presents the project and ending with a strong image. I know I've always sort of tried to have the photos sort of help tell that story? Like what, like you're going from space to space to space, especially like if you're doing something like a K through 12 project where there's multiple spaces. Do you have any advice on what helps as a judge, how you're seeing the images, or are you just taking those and trying to understand the project better and those details in those additional photos?
You want to start on that one, Mark?
Okay, yeah, I can start on that. I think it always helps to be thoughtful about the order of your imagery. And I think you can use your narrative as a guide for the cadence of images, I guess. So for example, maybe it's an interior submission. Maybe you do want to show concept, whether it be a sketch or a rendering, and then a layout, and then the final product. So it tells that whole story about how the problem was solved. Or maybe the interesting part of the project is how you move through the space, start at the front and end at the rear, or do a whole loop throughout the space. I know some submissions that I've seen, for example, like a hospital, it helps to walk through the lobby to the nurse's station, to the patient room. It just helps guide the whole story that you're telling. So I think it is important, but how you address it is up to you as a designer. Just make sure it is addressed in both the order of your images and your narrative and description.
Yeah, I completely agree. I like to be led through a project, as we were kind of talking about before. That first image is an overall, and I like to kind of be led around the space. I've certainly seen a lot of submissions where there's a lot going on, and every photo is kind of completely different from the previous one, and I get lost, and I feel disconnected. I don't feel like it's the same project. So it makes it harder. If I can be led along and kind of understand where I am visually within the space, that helps orient me. I might be kind of odd like that, but I like to kind of picture myself in the space where I am and how I got from one space to the other. You can't always do that. I certainly don't do that on all my submissions. But if I can speak to it a little bit and talk about the exterior, if there is an exterior, or the lobby, and then talk about if it's an office, say, the open office areas, and then I'm going to talk about some of the smaller gathering spaces, and kind of go from the big to the small, and then open it back up towards the end of the submission again to a little bit of a kind of a overall summary image. So that's something I like to try and do, but sometimes we don't get full control of all the photos, and you can't do that progression, but try to use then the narratives within each photo to kind of lead you in.
Mm-hmm. So this was an interesting question. Do you tailor your submission for your local market where you're submitting, or do you think about the international panel that the project's going to get judged at the local level and hopefully then move up into an international? And how do you bridge those two perspectives?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Mark, if you don't mind to start. That one I kind of threw in there because it's something I've seen a lot, and it's something I have struggled with in my submissions. I think it's fairly safe to say in most markets that if you are submitting and you're concerned a lot with the local, or you're interested in the local, you're probably going to have a much better chance of winning something locally. And if you're interested in putting an IES award winner on your marketing material, I don't see a lot of people saying what level of IES award that they received, myself included. I will often just put the simple statement down. So if I won a honorable mention in the international, or I won, top prize in the local, I'm still going to put IES award winner. And so I will sometimes think about what category am I going to submit in, knowing my national pool or international pool of projects versus my local. So in the Northwest, energy and environmental design, for example, I think most of us design with that in mind, and our watts per square foot is much lower than the rest of the country. It can be a little hard to win that one locally because there's so many great applicants. But what I have found nationally is that we lead a lot of the country in terms of our sustainability, and sometimes even our controllability of systems, things like that. So we can have a leg up if we want to submit that in that category internationally. So that's kind of why I say think about where you're most concerned, or where you think your chances are best. I will say it's very hard to win an international interior lighting award. There are so many amazing applicants, but you stand a chance of winning that locally. So just think about it and kind of balance out what category you submit in for what your ultimate goal is to get recognition for. Hopefully that made some sense.
To add to that?
Yeah, I think I would just have to agree with Jesse. First and foremost, now I'm going to start asking which award people have won, if they're just noting that they have an IES award. But yeah, what are your personal goals? Are you looking to be recognized locally? Are you really trying to get your name out there nationally or internationally? Also think about trends in your area. For example, exterior lighting. Are we doing things different here in the Puget Sound than they are, say, throughout the rest of the country? Are you going to stand out? Is your submission going to align with all the others? Just kind of aligning what designers are doing locally versus nationally. And if you think that what we're doing is a standout in this region, specifically for energy and sustainability, yeah, throw those in for a national submission or an international, because I think those projects will stand out locally regardless.
Yeah, quite often I'll submit in two categories if I think I might stand a chance in both of those. Mm-hmm. And what I have found, just me personally, when it comes to the international side, we almost always get something in the controls and in the energy and the kind of energy category. We almost always win in those categories, or at least get an honorable mention. And so I've found that the Northwest does a pretty good job of leading the country there.
Right. So very, very valid points. So what makes you crazy in a submission? Want to throw it to Mark?
I think the biggest thing would be a narrative that doesn't have any imagery that's backing it up. In both the overall narrative and the description of the image, they just need to align and mesh really well together. Fortunately or unfortunately, lighting is very visual, obviously. So your images need to be representative of what the writing is saying. So that would be number one. I think I had a couple others written down here. Another one would be repetitive photos. I think I mentioned that a little bit earlier. If you're just trying to max out the 10 photos and you have 3 views of the same room that are essentially showing the same thing, I'd say cut 2 of those photos out. I think you'll have a stronger submission.
Jesse, do you have things that drive you crazy?
Yeah, one I already mentioned, was the not fulfilling what's in the score sheet, so that I have to score you lower, even though I really want to give you a higher score. That's probably one of the biggest ones. Certainly those that Mark mentioned are up there. It really drives me nuts when I see I think it's 25 words or less for the caption, and when people don't caption that photo. They just kind of talk about something else, but use those 25 words to talk about it, even though it has nothing to do with the photo. And I think people can do that to a certain extent. For example, one thing I will do is often I will put the controls kind of tidbit in one of those captions, or talk about the watts per square foot. So I kind of tackle that energy part of the scorecard, but I'll try to tie it into what you see on the screen. And I think that is important. As a judge, the first thing that I do is I go through the photos, so I kind of have an understanding of what I'm going to be hearing or reading, and then I read through everything. So if that helps as well with kind of that photo order we were talking about before, that's my process. And so when there's things that don't align, that causes me to kind of go back, have to think about it, say I don't understand, and I'm going to score it lower.
And I think having somebody, like, I know when you do your own submission, you get really, you're focused, and I always like to have somebody else go through and read it and look at the slides and make sure that, what you're saying makes sense, and
always
you haven't left something out.
And what I've also done in that instance, sorry to interrupt, Eileen, if you send this off to someone and you give it to them as a verbal presentation as well, you might catch some things that you're having to explain more in detail that should be added into the text. So when I've done submissions, I'll have the narrative written out and I'll present it to, say, one of my teammates or peers, and they'll have a question and we just need to address those things. So having that feedback and more of a team effort in these submissions is always helpful. I also did have one other thing that is both something I love and drives me crazy. I love to see a renovation project where you have some great before photos, yes, and the after, but don't waste all your photos on a before. Sometimes all you need is that one outdated fluorescent troughers or tubes or whatnot, just to give the context of what that project used to look like, and then hit them with your beautiful new lighting design.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've seen a lot of lobby renovations, and a lot of the narrative talks about what it used to be and how different it is, and I've absolutely found myself wanting to know what did it look like before. And I know it can be hard to slip that in, because you certainly don't want that to be your first photo, because then everybody's going to think that was your design. But so where do you put it to kind of set the stage for that? But if you can, I think that is valuable. I've also seen where folks will put 2 photos on a single slide, which counts as 2 photos. So that's 2 of your 10 if you do that. But you could put the before and after on the same slide, and that I've benefited from that. I think that can help. But again, that does take 2 of your photos of your 10.
But that's a good suggestion, to do them side by side, as opposed to, I remember judging once and seeing the before and going, oh my God, what is this? And then,
Yep.
Finally realizing, oh, that was the before shot. But you start like that, I think it was the opening shot. So you start off totally in a mindset of, this is the worst thing I've ever seen.
Yes.
Or I just get confused. Well, which one is it?
Right.
Yes.
And Mark, I really like your idea of actually doing it out loud. And that's how you're going to find your mistakes and getting that feedback from somebody else going, what are you talking about? So what really, how do you know you have a winning submission from the get-go? What makes you excited? Throw it to Mark.
I think, just to echo what Jesse and I have been saying, just start with the scorecard. You're gonna automatically get a good baseline of points if you're addressing everything on the scorecard. For me, second, definitely show the problem and the solution, whether that be a mix of your narrative and your images. Or if you do need to bring in some plans showing, look at this crazy layout of this building and look at what we were able to achieve. Or they had all these really intricate architectural details that you can't really see in this image because it's illuminated so beautifully. Let me show you a section or a detail of some of that so you actually get an idea about how complex this was and how seamless we were able to get the whole idea across architecturally and through the lighting.
Perfect.
I think for me, it's a combination of things. If I know that I have some imagery that's different, if I haven't seen a lot of this type of project come through, then I know I'm going to stand a better chance. I think we were talking about a little earlier about being able to stand apart from everybody else. And you know, K through 12 school, we can do some really fun things, but you know, they do start to kind of look similar after a while, and so it's going to be harder. You're going to have to work harder to have a winner, from my experience, with something like that. So if I know that I've got something that's unique and different that maybe not a lot of people have seen, that gets me excited. I think that comes through the submissions, and I've seen those generally do better. And then if I have a story I can tell, so even if it is a K through 12, but I've had a really good story about how the project came to be, or how we worked with, you know, local BIPOC artists to elevate the lobby experience and really bring lighting and art into that kind of environment. You know, telling that story is going to be powerful, and I think is going to resonate with people who are reading it. So I think those are the two things I kind of look for, as a good story and powerful images.
I completely agree. Whether your project type is very unique and something that people don't see very often, or if it is a K-12, usually, for lack of a better word, the most boring parts of those designs can tend to be classrooms, unfortunately. If you thought way out of the box and were able to achieve something really striking and solving those problems for exciting lighting and imagery in a classroom, throw those projects in, because you're going to stand out. It's happened the same for multifamily and hospitals. Those can get very repetitive. If you have this solution that, especially something you haven't seen before that you thought of, those are really going to stand out. And again, like Jesse said, make sure the narrative is addressing those things and your captions.
Yeah, for K through 12, a prime example of that is, you know, a classroom, like you said, it is going to be fairly standard. But if you talk a little bit about, maybe that project had some trauma-informed design discussions where we try to create a zone of lighting that is quieter, is glare-free. It allows things to be dimmed or reflected off of walls to give students who might need a little respite from some of the standard lighting. And you kind of talk about that a little bit as a design challenge and something you addressed. It's going to make that classroom that much more interesting.
Right. Well, I know I am now motivated to start working on my award submissions. And I'm going to make sure I have that scorecard as my starting point instead of doing it after. That's always been my problem. Does anyone else have any questions before or do either Mark or Jesse have any final words of wisdom? Other than we all need to get going.
Yeah.
It's going to be February 17th before we know it.
I think my final thought would be, if you have the time, submit as many projects as you can. I personally never think that my projects are that exceptional. But once you see them and see how they affect people, they can be quite striking. So just get those submissions in. We are doing such beautiful lighting design and thoughtful environmental and sustainable design in this part of the country that just needs to be shown off. And we have so many people that can be celebrated, and we should. So I just love to see more and more projects submitted from this part of the country.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The other thing I would say is, I don't know how many years I've been submitting, and every damn time it comes down to the wire. I don't know why. I blame all the photographers. I think everything just waits till the last minute. It always seems like we're trying to make those photo selections or get it photographed right beforehand. And you have 2 years from the point of substantial completion of the project to submit. So don't rush if you can put it off another year, unless you really want to, unless you think it's out in the news and you want to strike while the iron's hot. But if you need more time on a project, take the time, get it reviewed by others, because I completely agree with Mark. It has to go through other people's hands to review and make sure that what you're trying to say makes sense, because we all get stuck in our heads. So give yourself time. I love the idea of reading it out loud. I think that's a fantastic approach as well, but give yourself time to do those things. And that's, I think, what usually I'm coming up against at the very last minute, is trying to get a couple of different eyes on it, get their feedback, get it all integrated, make sure I have the word count okay, and submit it on time. And it's always stressful. So the sooner you can do it, the better. But the scorecards do change year to year. So don't do everything, right at the beginning of the year. Leave yourself a little wiggle room, because the scorecard could change.
Good. Right, yeah, so download those the current scorecards, don't pull it from last year's folder.
Yeah.
All right, well, Mark, so Amanda just posted that the local, at least the Seattle IES chapter, is looking for nominations for judges right now. Jesse and Mark, I want to thank you so much for all your insights. And I just wanted to mention a couple of upcoming events. Our next Wild Women in Lighting Plus Design is also going to be a virtual event on noon on February 16th. So we'll all be madly, submitting our IES awards. And that event is, our Portland chapter is hosting that, but will be virtual, and it's going to be featuring Naomi Miller talking about her career. So definitely going to be a great session. And also on February 16th, Jill Cody, she was on our local IALD chapter, is hosting a in-person tour of 2 projects downtown Seattle. And then the IES in Portland is doing this advanced educational fly-in on February 2nd and 3rd, which sounds super fun, during the Portland Winter Lighting Festival. And then the Seattle IES, ILD, and I think Wild, I think we're helping out too, is holding another 20 by 20 lighting slam on March 23rd, and that will be in person. And if you're interested in submitting, you need to submit your ideas pretty soon. I think I'm working on that one too. But I got to do my IES submissions first. Does anyone have anything else? AJ's our president, so I don't know if you want to have a final word before we wrap up. Let people go.
No, this has been wonderfully helpful. And, sometimes you're like, yeah, I knew all that, but it's helpful to hear someone else say it and be like, yeah, that really is important. I really need to read it out loud. I really need to get it in someone else's hands. So thank you so much, Mark and Jesse, for taking the time to help us with these submissions. Really appreciate it.
Our pleasure.
Of course. And thanks, Eileen, for moderating.
Of course, yeah. And it's good, I've only been up in the Seattle universe for 3 years. So I do most of my projects are in Southern California. That's where our main office is. So I usually submit all our stuff in Orange County. So I could potentially judge here in Seattle because I wouldn't have a conflict. But thank you so much and hope to see you all very soon. So I will let us all go and go grab some lunch.
Just one moment. Amanda did have a question. So this has been recorded. I think this will be posted probably on the Wild National website. We will send out a link in our next email where this recording can be found.
Perfect. All righty. Well, then we'll say goodbye and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.